Welcome to the first chapter. This book is about Africa. Africa is a very large continent. It has many natural resources. These are things like gold, diamonds, oil, and fertile land for farming. There are many different countries and cultures in Africa. It is a continent with a long and rich history. But today, many people around the world think of Africa and think of poverty. It is true that many African countries face great challenges. Many people do not have enough food or good houses. They may not have access to good education or health care. This situation is like a puzzle. Why is Africa, with so much potential wealth, also known for having so much poverty? Many people try to explain this. They often point to two main things: corruption and colonization. Corruption means that some people in power are not honest. They use money and resources for themselves. They do not help the country or the people. Colonization was when countries from Europe came to Africa and took control. They ruled African lands and used their resources. These are certainly parts of the answer. They are important problems that Africa has faced. But are these the only reasons? Do they explain everything? This book suggests that these common ideas are not the full story. We need to look deeper. We need to ask why corruption became so common in many places. We need to ask why European countries were able to colonize Africa and how that colonization changed Africa so deeply. What were the long-term effects? To understand Africa's current situation, we must go back in time. We will take a journey through history. We will start when some African kingdoms were very powerful and wealthy. We will see how things changed over centuries. We will look at how trade with other parts of the world affected Africa. We will learn about difficult periods that caused harm to African societies and their economies. This journey will show us the deep reasons behind Africa's struggles today. It will help us understand why it has been difficult for Africa to recover from past problems. Many other countries that were once ruled by outside powers have become rich. Why has Africa's path been different? What made recovery so hard for many African nations? This book will explore these questions. We will look at the history from the past to recent times to find answers. It is a complex story, but an important one to understand Africa today. 2. Rich Africa long ago. Long ago, around 700 years past, Africa was a rich place. In East Africa, people traded goods by ship across the big Indian Ocean. They were connected to lands like India and Persia. In West Africa, there were strong kingdoms and empires that were known far away. A very famous and rich ruler from this time was Mansa Musa, who was the leader of the Mali Empire. African people had great knowledge and skills. They were very good at working with metals like iron and gold. They understood difficult ideas, including in mathematics. They had detailed and complex ways to rule their lands, with organized cities, large kingdoms, and powerful empires. For many years, Africa was an important part of the world, trading and connecting with places in Europe and Asia. But over time, things began to change. In the 1400s and 1500s, Africa's wealth and power started to fall behind other parts of the world. Two big reasons for this change came from outside Africa. The first was the Ottoman Empire, which was a powerful empire in the East. They needed many workers and often got them by fighting wars and taking people. Buying or capturing people from East Africa became a common way for traders to get workers for the Ottoman lands. This trade of people from East Africa continued for a very long time, even into the 1800s. The second reason came from countries in Western Europe. At first, ships from Europe came to West Africa to trade things like salt and cloth. They were looking for valuable goods from Africa, such as gold and ivory. Later, European ships started sailing around the large continent of Africa to find a sea path to Asia. West Africa was a good place for these ships to stop and get supplies. Then, Europeans found new lands across the Atlantic Ocean, which they called the Americas. They wanted to build large farms and mines there, but they needed many people to do the hard work. The local people in the Americas suffered greatly, and many died from diseases that Europeans brought. So, Europeans looked to West Africa for workers. In West Africa at that time, some people worked for others and were called slaves, but their situation was often different from the harsh system Europeans created. These workers sometimes had rights, and their families were often protected. European traders began to buy large numbers of people from West Africa. Some African leaders agreed to sell people. Their gold mines were producing less gold in the 1500s, so they needed new ways to get money. Fighting wars with their neighbors and selling the captured people to the Europeans seemed like a good deal. It brought money and made their rivals weaker. This trade grew very big, sending many ships across the ocean. Ships went from Europe carrying goods to Africa, then to Africa to buy people, and then took these people across the Atlantic to the Americas. From the Americas, ships returned to Europe with goods like sugar and cotton. Ships from Europe brought goods like cloth and metal tools to Africa to buy more people. This trade had a very bad effect on Africa for a long time. Many strong and skilled people who could help Africa grow were taken away. This meant that African industries, like making tools or cloth, did not grow strong. They could not make goods as well or as cheaply as people in Europe or Asia. Also, because capturing people for trade caused many wars and dangers, African kingdoms had to spend more money and time on their armies and defense. This meant less money and time was used to build schools, farms, or businesses. This trade of people slowly made Africa weaker over many centuries. 3. How trade changed Africa. Europeans started coming to West Africa. They were looking for things to trade like gold and ivory. Later, European sailors found new lands across the Atlantic Ocean. These lands became colonies. Europeans wanted many workers for their colonies, especially for big farms called plantations. The native people in these new lands got sick from European diseases and many died, so Europeans looked to Africa for workers. In West Africa, there was already a kind of slavery, but it was different from the slavery in the Americas. People who were slaves often had some rights, and their children were not always born slaves. They were often part of families or communities, but the European demand for workers changed this. Europeans wanted many people to take across the ocean. Some African rulers and traders began selling people to the Europeans. They got goods like cloth, guns, and alcohol in return. To get people to sell, some groups started wars with their neighbors just to capture them. This made slavery in Africa much harsher. Captured people became like property, not people with rights. A large trade route began. It went like a triangle across the Atlantic. Ships went from Europe to Africa with goods to trade for captured people. Then they took the people across the ocean to the Americas. This was a terrible journey. In the Americas, the people were sold to work on plantations. The ships then bought things like sugar and cotton and took them back to Europe. At first, many African kingdoms were strong. Europeans had to trade to get people. They could not just take them by force. But the slave trade caused more fighting among African groups. Kingdoms became weaker over time. This trade had a big, bad effect on Africa. Millions of strong and skilled people were taken away. These were people who could have helped build African businesses and farms. Without these workers, African industries, like making cloth or metal goods, stopped growing. They could not compete with cheaper goods from Europe and Asia. So Africans started buying more things from outside. Also, because the slave trade caused many wars, African rulers had to spend money on soldiers and weapons. This meant they had less money to spend on making their countries better in other ways. The trade brought some money and goods to some people, but over a long time, it made African societies and economies weaker. 4. The big problems start. The slave trade caused very bad problems for Africa over many years. Taking millions of people away made African economies much weaker. The number of people in a country affects its economy. With fewer people, there were fewer workers and fewer buyers. Important people with special skills were also often taken as slaves. Craftspeople, who made things like tools, cloth, and other goods, were lost. Because of this, local industries in Africa could not grow and improve like they did in Europe and Asia. Over time, products made in African countries could not compete with cheaper or better goods coming from other places. People in Africa started buying imported goods, and African industries became small and unimportant. Also, many African states had to fight wars to protect themselves or to capture people to sell as slaves. This meant leaders had to spend a lot of money and effort on armies and weapons. They could not spend this money on building schools, roads, or businesses that would help the economy grow for the future. Their economies got weaker because of this constant need to be ready for conflict. In the 19th century, big changes happened that made things even worse. The first big change was the end of the slave trade. Countries in Europe and the Americas stopped buying slaves because it became illegal. This was a good thing for human rights, but it suddenly took away the main way many African economies made money from trade. African countries had not built other strong industries because of the focus on the slave trade and militarization. So when the slave trade ended, they had little else to sell to the outside world. Their ability to buy goods and tools they needed from other countries was lost. This caused their economies to collapse in the 19th century. At the same time, Europe was in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. New technology and factories allowed Europe to make goods much faster and cheaper than ever before. This made the economic gap between Europe and Africa much wider. Africa became much less important in world trade. Because Africa seemed weak and poor, many negative ideas and stereotypes about the continent started to spread in Europe. People said Africa had no history or no good governments. These were wrong ideas, but they helped people in other parts of the world see Africa as a place that needed to be controlled or helped from the outside. This weakness and the negative ideas set the stage for the next difficult period in Africa's history. 5. Europe takes over. In the late 19th century, a new big change happened in Africa. Many countries in Europe decided they wanted to take control of land in Africa. This time, they wanted to rule it directly. This is often called the scramble for Africa because European countries quickly tried to get as much land as they could. Why did they do this? Africa had many valuable things like minerals and other natural resources. Europe had grown rich and strong from new machines and factories, needing these materials. Also, after many years of problems, Africa was not as strong as before. Europeans saw Africa as weak and easy to take over. For example, the King of Belgium took a large area in Central Africa. This European rule brought many bad things for African people. Poverty became much worse. Europeans took the best land for themselves or for large farms. Africans were forced to work very hard on these farms or in mines, often for no money. This was forced labor. Europeans took Africa's wealth, like gold and diamonds, and sent it to Europe. The money Africans paid in taxes did not help them. It helped the European rulers. Europeans also built roads, train lines, and ports. But these were built to move resources from mines or farms to the coast, so they could be shipped to Europe. They did not build good connections between different African cities or regions. So it was hard for Africans to travel or trade within Africa itself. Also, under European rule, Africans were not allowed to be leaders or managers in their own countries. They were not given chances to get good jobs or learn important skills like running businesses or working as doctors or mechanics. Europeans held all the power. This meant that Africans did not get the training they needed to run their own countries or build strong economies in the future. This lack of opportunity created big problems that would last for a long time. 6. Freedom, but still poor. After World War II, many African countries became free. People had high hopes for a good future. They thought freedom would bring wealth and a better life. But the new nations faced difficult problems. Colonial powers left quickly. Not many Africans had the skills needed to run a country. They did not have enough teachers, doctors, or engineers. The roads and railways built during colonial times helped take resources out of Africa, but they did not connect cities and towns within the countries. Leaders needed a plan to build their economies. Many chose an idea called African socialism. This plan meant the government would own and control important businesses like mines and farms. The idea was to use the country's money to build factories and create jobs. They also put extra taxes on things from other countries. They hoped people would buy local goods instead. However, this plan did not work as well as hoped. African countries found it hard to sell their goods to each other because of trade rules. It was also hard to sell goods to other continents because they could not compete with big factories in Europe or Asia. Government-controlled businesses were often slow to change. Also, many Africans did not have the education or training for new factory jobs. In the 1950s, only a small number of Africans had gone to secondary school or university. Nature also made things hard. Parts of Africa had long dry periods or harmful insects that hurt farming. Diseases like malaria and others made many people sick. Getting medicine and doctors was difficult and costly for poor people. Leaders chose this plan partly because they had no easy examples to follow at that time. Under colonial rule, Africans did not learn how to run private companies. The old system was controlled by the government. This mix of problems made it hard for Africa to become rich even after gaining freedom. The challenges were very big for the new nations. 7. New problems, bad leaders and money. After countries became free, they faced new difficulties. Their new governments were not very strong. Many countries had different groups of people inside them. Sometimes, leaders used these differences to get votes from just one group. This made countries less united and caused political problems. Some leaders quickly took full control. They stopped other political groups from working. They created one-party rule to keep power. These leaders took state money, which was for the country's development. They gave this money to friends or officials to stay popular. There was little oversight, so corruption grew easily. Foreign companies and governments from rich countries wanted Africa's resources like oil. They paid money to corrupt leaders for easy access. This made leaders and rich people richer, but the money did not help the regular people. This corruption hurt the economies. People saw this and protested, but leaders used force to stop them. Sometimes, former colonial countries helped stop protests to protect their resource access. Many changes in power, like coups, happened often in the first 20 years. Africa looked unstable. Few people wanted to invest except to take resources out. The 1980s were very hard, called Africa's lost decade. Roads and railways broke down. Educated people often left Africa for better jobs abroad. Countries that gave money before, like the Soviet Union and Western nations, gave much less. This lack of money made things worse. African leaders needed money. They asked rich countries for help and loans. These countries gave money but asked for economic changes. For example, they said governments should sell state businesses. But often, leaders sold these businesses to friends or family corruptly. The changes did not help the economy much. However, by the late 1980s and early 1990s, people across Africa started protesting again for more freedom. Rich countries then changed how they gave aid. They started helping countries that moved towards democracy. This encouraged more political freedom and elections in Africa. The path was difficult, but countries started making slow steps towards more open government and trying to fix the problems of corruption and instability. This process helped make parts of Africa more stable for business in the early 1990s. 8. Hope for the future. Today, many people in Africa are trying new ways to make their countries better. There is a new focus on good governance. This means leaders are working to be more honest and fight corruption. They also want to help private businesses grow. Young people now have better education than before. This helps them start businesses and find good jobs. African countries are also working together more. Groups like the African Union help countries cooperate on trade and peace. In the last 20 years, some countries in Africa have had strong economic growth. Their economies are getting bigger quickly. However, Africa still has many problems. Climate change is a big challenge. Many people are still poor and health problems are common. Safety and security are also concerns in some areas. But Africans are finding their own solutions. They are creating new ideas to fix local problems. For example, some scientists found a way to use a harmful plant from Lake Victoria to make food for animals. This shows African innovation. More people are joining the middle class. This means more people have money to buy things. This can help create a strong market inside Africa. When Africans buy from African businesses, it helps those businesses grow. So the future has hope. It will not be easy and problems are still real. But with better leaders, more educated people, and countries working together, Africa is building a better future. The path is difficult, but many people are working hard. What do you think is the most important thing for Africa's future?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.